recording? Fantastic. All right, here we go. So this is our second official Lyceum for the Accounting Alchemy Network. Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. We are very, very, very excited to have you here today. And for anyone who is not aware, the Accounting Alchemy Network, we are here. Our vision is to create a world where accounting professionals are a positive force in developing a sustainable and regenerative global ecosystem and culture. And we have a very important topic for you today because diversity, equity, and inclusion is a cornerstone of that work. So to start us off, we're going to go ahead and introduce our hosts and our special guests. Matthew, do you want to kick us off with an introduction of yourself, please?
I do, yeah, and thank you, Jina. I see your note in the chat. So hello, everyone. Yeah, I don't know if that matters, Ingrid. Do you want to take a look at that?
We are officially started. The webinar is started.
There. All right, good, awesome. Yeah, so hello, everyone. Mathew Heggem. I am the co-founder of this initiative to really help the accounting industry go through a major transformation. And I say a major transformation because I think you know, it's interesting. Like this morning, I was listening to a podcast about the number of natural disasters we project to occur on our planet, and if you just think about the sort of severity of the circumstances that we've faced and are facing today, it's like no, now is actually the time where we do actually need to change some things, and like we need to do it now. Not like think about it and pontificate on it and then hope that things will get better in the future, but no, there's some things that need to occur now. And I think the accounting, and what's interesting about that webinar or that podcast is they were talking about the importance on a global scale of really thinking about the financial systems that are impacting global economies and local economies and cultures and communities. And so here we are as members of the profession and influencers of the profession and participants of the profession, and we touch that system. We touch that system and have the ability to really shift the conversation on what's possible when it comes to capitalism and money movement through economies, and to bring the humanity back to our work as professionals, as professional service providers. So I'm excited to be having this conversation with Jina because you know, I think this is probably one of the most important conversations to be had in our profession, frankly, because we need more talent from different perspectives to address the issues that we're facing. You know, what do they say? The same problems cannot be solved by whatever that you know the saying, and you're better than but see that saying, Ingrid, maybe you could fill it in. Yeah, and that's where I'm coming from with regards to this conversation today.
Fantastic. Thank you, Matthew. And for anyone out there who doesn't know me, hi, everyone. I'm Ingrid Edstrom from priestessofprofits.com. And I did forget to click the start webinar button. So it's on the recording, but for those of us who are actually joining us live here on Zoom, in case you have not been to a Lyceum before, this is our second official Lyceum for the Accounting Alchemy Network, where we are working to create a world where accounting professionals are a positive force in developing sustainable and regenerative global ecosystem and culture. And a very important cornerstone of that discussion is the discussion of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So with that, I would love for our special guest host to introduce herself. Jina, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself and your background, please?
Sure. And you know, I always struggle with whether I should do this or not. My name is pronounced Jina.
Jina.
So it's a
Thank you
sound at the end. And maybe that's contradictory to my personality because it's probably not how you feel around me sometimes because of what I talk about. I talk a lot about diversity, inclusion, and what does that mean? So my background, I'm a CPA. I've lived my whole life in public accounting. I say I was born in the Big Eight. I mean, you know, before growing up. And so my first job was at Touche Ross, if anybody remembers them, one of the Big Eight firms. And I stayed there until almost manager, and then I started my own practice. I sold that practice to go to the AICPA. I left the AICPA to go to the National Association of Black Accountants. And after that, I was director for diversity and inclusion at Grant Thornton. I've had my own practice now for a couple of years, and I feel like two things that I bring to this discussion. One is lived experience in the profession as a woman of color. I also understand from my own background growing up, I'm biracial. I have an invisible disability. I grew up in a community where we didn't see race, and I mean that genuinely, because I didn't know that that wasn't the world until I went to college. And I felt unprepared. There's a challenge, so there's two sides to this, but I really just want people to have a conversation about how we can see each other and work with each other and appreciate the different skill sets that we bring, because corporate America, it's not the tradition, it's not the habit, that's not the practice, it's not that hasn't been the norm. And that seeps into the way we do things in the accounting industry. You could be in tech, you could be in public practice, you could be an accountant in government or industry. It doesn't matter. I think we don't value the mind. Matthew, you said it yourself. We need all those different perspectives to be effective. So, but we need to open up the conversation so it doesn't feel shamey and blamey and all that. All right, sorry, I went too far. Introducing myself. Hi, I'm Jina Etienne. I'm a CPA. I'm founder and principal consultant at Etienne Consulting, a diversity and inclusion practice.
That was great. Thank you. I'm glad that you dove into all of that, because that kicks off our discussion perfectly. And thank you for the correction on the pronunciation of your name. So I would like to touch briefly on when we first got together to discuss having this discussion, and mentioned that we really wanted to have you as basically our first guest. So our initial Lyceum was with the fantastic Gail Perry, who is with us actually here on Zoom. So, oh, and we've got Sarah also. Wonderful. Welcome, Sarah. That Lyceum was kind of kicking off the whole Lyceum foundation of what is the problem that we're facing here. But we really wanted diversity, equity, inclusion to be our first official topic. And when we tossed this idea by you, you're like, there are so many other shinier topics, like you're not going to get a whole lot of participation. And, you know, it was an interesting conversation, because for us here in the Accounting Alchemy Network, we see this as a foundational topic because it is so important to every other piece that we're discussing. And the fact that most accounting firms see this as a human resources compliance box to check is part of the problem. So I would love to address that and hear if you have any thoughts on that particular area.
Oh, no, I don't know it. No, I don't know if I've thought about it before. I'm being a smart ass. Am I allowed to say that? All right, so let me go back to something that you said, which is, you know, when we first talked, when people ask me if I'll speak at conferences and do things like that, I say I won't do a breakout session, and I'll only do a main stage or a keynote. And I don't say that out of arrogance, because that can be a whole different set of fears and challenges. But I say that because of, and this is true, I was in practice for 17 years. I had my own firm. And frankly, when I went to conferences, ain't nobody got time for that. Like, my interest was practice management. I actually saw Gail at, I think it was Practitioner Symposium. Remember back, Gail, when it was whatever that was called? Before it was PracTech and all of that. I wanted to hear from people like Gail on how to grow my practice, how to differentiate myself in the marketplace. I was a tax practitioner. So how do I do tax? I mean, and it's constantly getting more complicated. How can I be a good boss and run a business? I did not think that anything other than that was a priority. And in my experience, when practitioners and accountants and enrolled agents and bookkeepers and all of us, you know, QuickBooks Pro advisors, we're at these events because we want to sharpen our skill set. And when you only have, think about it, if there's 6 sessions that you can attend in a day, are you going to give up the one on how to sell more business to the one that sounds like how to make people happier that are minorities? Because the way this whole conversation is positioned, it's positioned as we want to make everybody feel good, and that everybody are the people who are not the majority. So there's no conversation that includes the majority. And in the case of our profession, from a leadership perspective, statistically, they are male and white. And if they're not part of the conversation, who are we talking to? And so why would you go to a D&I session? I was mortified at one conference. I was at a conference with almost 3,000 attendees. I had 2 people in my session. I would have rather had my session canceled. And I was at a national AICPA conference with recognized industry leaders on a panel discussion. I won't name names, but if I did, everybody would know who they are. Nobody came. That's, wow. And I think because we're not positioning diversity and inclusion right, Matthew, you said it's like a HR thing. It's a keep up with the Joneses thing. You can't say you're not, you can't not say you're doing it. But nobody really knows what the it is because we haven't talked about it beyond one word, diversity and inclusion. It's one word. Diversity and inclusion is literally a word today, and we don't separate and distinguish diversity from inclusion. They are distinctly different things. And then there's equity, which nobody wants to talk about because it's scary, and belonging, which now everybody's just confused. So I think if we can reframe it in a way that's approachable, and relatable, maybe we can make some progress.
So let's do that right now. Let's reframe it. And maybe we can start by defining for our audience each of those terms, because you're right, diversity and inclusion are not the same thing and should not just be inexorably lumped together. And I think it's really important that we address equity and belonging. So please, which one would you like to start with?
So the letters are DEIB. And if you go out and look at businesses and firms today, there's some combination of those letters. DEI, DIB, IDEAB, I don't know, IDAB, and there's no A.
We like to include the J here.
Say that again.
We like to include the J also, justice. We like to call it Jedi training.
Yeah, actually, no, you're right. And justice, though, adds a whole nother level to it that draws it out into a more societal dynamic.
Yeah.
So if we think about it in terms of organizational culture, diversity are differences. That's it. When I'm in seminars, I ask people to dump out a bag of M&Ms on the table. It'll make a mess. But they look all the same. I mean, they look all different colors. But take any one, close your eyes, pick up an M&M and pop it in your mouth. Can you tell me what color it is? You cannot.
Right.
Diversity is simply the differences of M&Ms. They come in lots of colors. That's it. So it's differences. Seeing them, valuing them, appreciating them, and so on. Understanding them. Inclusion is an intention. An organization wants to create a space where everybody is invited to participate, where we encourage people to bring their thoughts, bring their experiences, do their best work, be part of the team. So we want to create that space. That's inclusion. Equity is we want to create a space where everybody has an equal shot at being successful, even though we all come at this work from different, with some might need some supports more than others. Because if we give everybody the same support, then like, it doesn't get us anywhere. Remind me to tell you the track example that I used for equity, what it means. And then belonging is, what does it feel like if my differences are seen and valued in a space where I am actually being included and I am treated and the policies and the practices seem fair and give me the supports that I need? And I'm going to feel like this is my place. This is my jam. These are my peeps. I am part of a really good team. I belong here. They are interconnected, but distinctly different concepts. And if we can address all of them, and not necessarily in a single strategy, we have a shot.
Yeah.
That help?
It does. It helps a lot. And what's coming to my mind is, like we were talking about, the compliance HR box to check of, oh, we have to do this work and it's important, puts a really negative feeling on the whole thing. When I think about diversity, I think about creating a synergy environment, such as in Stephen Covey's book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Habit number 6 is synergize. And it's all about celebrating our differences, because when we have a higher diversity of ideas and backgrounds and lived experiences in the room, we are more likely to come up with new solutions to issues that no one of us would come up with alone. And,
Right.
Addressing what you said earlier, the fact that currently the accounting profession is kind of pale, male, and stale. we've got a monoculture going on. And
Well,
if we can bring in more ideas, we'll have better innovation. We'll be more successful, and we're going to have more fun with it.
so, oh, wow, you're attacking me with thoughts. So something that popped in, I can't remember them all, but homogeneous groups versus heterogeneous. How do you say that? Homogeneous and heterogeneous, right?
I think you got it.
Well, how about all the same and different? The data tells us, we know the data tells us that groups where there is more diversity, age, gender, background, experience, perspective, race, gender identity, all of these things, single, married, young, those groups make better decisions, faster decisions, more ethical decisions than homogeneous groups. So the data is clear. And if we take race out of the picture, if we take gender out of the picture, the women's movement, like you take those triggering topics out of the picture, nobody disagrees with those statements. So if we talk about diversity and inclusion from the perspective of something that triggers people, we're not going to get anywhere. On the other hand, we also have to acknowledge that the women and the underrepresented groups have their barriers. They have more barriers. And so that was the first thing I thought about. Then I thought about stereotypes, and I thought, well, if I had to say a stereotype applied to me and I was okay with that, I'd go with the CPA stereotype. And I would argue that a Black woman and a white guy are hiding behind that same stereotype, because it's not a bad one. I mean, think about it. We're smart, educated. And if for those who are listening that aren't stereotypes, you're a certified QuickBooks Pro advisor, you're an enrolled agent. Hell, you just have an accounting degree, or frankly, I know one of the best bookkeepers I knew had no formal training in education in accounting. So this is about the subject matter experts out there. We're all hiding behind this perception of the accounting industry. We're smart, we're educated, we're trustworthy. And there are other ones. We're probably affluent, possibly married, likely heterosexual. We're not necessarily gay. Definitely don't have any tattoos. I mean, there are these things. And so you come across as this sort of, Jane and John, America perspective. And if that's what you want to believe of me, if I can hide behind that and have all those positive labels applied to me, I'm going to take it. Whether or not I'm a Black woman, whether or not I have a disability, whether or not I'm a gay man, doesn't matter. I'm going to hide behind that same stereotype, as well as I will if I'm a white guy who grew up always wanting to be a dancer, or a white man who really wants to take parental leave and stay home with his new child. Because those aren't the norms. Those aren't what people believe. And so stereotypes, they are a big part of this discussion in our industry, because we don't talk about the good ones. We only talk about the bad ones.
Yes.
That makes sense. I feel like I'm all over the place now.
It does make sense. That's fantastic.
I'm looking
Yeah.
at Gail's question.
Yeah, well, yeah, I wanted to acknowledge Gail's question. So two things came up. One, I don't want to forget to ask you about the track reference as it relates
I'll write it down.
So write that one down for sure about equity. And then two, another thing that we talked about in our preliminary conversation, at least my conversations with you, were around the difference between, you know, the demand for like, oh, I want a workshop on this, or a one-off, like, oh yeah, can we just throw a Band-Aid on it and call it good? Or this workshop's going to solve. So like the distinction between that sort of, quick fix Band-Aid sort of strategy versus actually embracing that, hey, consulting engagements that address these issues over time is really what we need to be doing. And then Gail's comment here, what do you say to the typical white male-run CPA firm leaders who say that focusing on diversity doesn't impact how they do their job? Quote, it's about the numbers. So if we can kind of maybe address Gail's comment and then tackle those two other pieces, it'd be awesome.
It's all interrelated. Gail, that is an awesome question. Thank you. And I think so. Part of the challenge and part of the thinking that's even behind that question is that white men aren't part of this. It might be their fault. That it might be their fault. But they're the ones that we can blame for this. They're the ones that are the problem. Well, this is ridiculous. I understand the perception, but if we only talk to white men or white male, we're going to just say white men, even though what we mean are predominantly white leaders in the profession. But for purposes of our conversation, let's just limit it to that group so it makes our language easier. That's fair. So if we come at the conversation with white men, you need to be nice to your minorities. You need your minorities to be happy. You need to not look down on or judge your millennials, right? You need to let working mothers keep their jobs, or working parents, have opportunities. It feels administrative, it feels burdensome, and it doesn't tie anything to their key business objectives. So let's stop talking about it from the perspective of it's the right thing to do, because that is not going to get us anywhere. I mean, yeah, sure, the right thing to do, but that's not why businesses should be doing this. Businesses should be doing this because they want to be effective, they want to grow, they want to be innovative, they want to retain their employees, they want to attract the best talent. And the only way to do all of those things is to not have 10 white guys in a room, because that does not reflect their customer base. It doesn't reflect their communities that they live and work in. Frankly, it doesn't reflect the trends that are coming out of our accounting schools. There are more women than men over the last, I don't know how many years, or almost the same number, pursuing accounting degrees. The number of minorities by ethnicity are slowly starting to creep up as a percentage of total graduates from accounting programs. So how about this, Gail? One of the things I ask partners when I have an opportunity to do a one-on-one coaching session, I ask partners to think about their recruiting rates, think about the retention rates, think about the trajectory that it takes to get to be partner. Let's, for fun's sake, what year are we in? 2022? Can't do math and I'm a CPA. All right, so let's say there's 15 years. Or no, we'll say it's 15 years to become a partner in a CPA firm. What's 22 minus 15? Dear God, this is where I couldn't do the math. 2005? Okay, whatever. Y'all know what I'm saying. Give or take 15 years. However diverse our entering class of new hires was 15 years ago is as diverse as the partnership could be today. Does that make sense? Now go back into the data 15 years ago and The graduates coming out of school at the time were predominantly male and predominantly white. So it is no shock then that the accounting leadership is predominantly male and predominantly white. Let's stop making it judgy about that. But what I want this partner to now think about then is, if you want to retire someday, how do you earn your retirement in a public accounting firm? Well, that payout of your retirement requires maintaining at least the status quo, but preferably growing as a firm. So mathematically, if today, I'll make it up, 15% of all graduates are people of color and 50% of all graduates are women, you need to at least hire in those proportions and then retain them. So the math 15 years from now will have a more diverse partnership, period. And if we don't hire people of color and women, we have narrowed down our candidate pool to the point where we cannot grow our businesses. And so to the typically white male run CPA firm, I want you to look at this in a very selfish way. In order for you to achieve your growth goals, you're going to need humans. Humans are coming into the workforce increasingly in different sizes, shapes, colors, and backgrounds. Forget all of that, just hire people, just hire humans. And if you do that, you will have a more diverse workforce, period. And that diversity is good for you. It drives innovation. There is a correlation between diversity and performance. When you have this workforce where people, because millennials see diversity as a part of their identity, where Gen Xers and boomers tend to see it as a EEOC sort of anti-discriminatory sort of things. If you can start to understand the mindset, these employees who feel that these organizations get them, they'll stay longer. They'll do their best work. People who feel like they belong take fewer sick days. This is dollars in your pocket, Mr. Partner. You don't have to believe in this from a racial perspective. Come at it from your pocketbook. All right, so.
That's brilliant. Thank you. And
Matthew,
I want to.
Yes, any other questions? Sorry.
Oh, I want to acknowledge really quick that when it comes to diversity, I think you hit the nail on the head when you were talking about, the older white male perspective. And I want to add in there that that's also an able-bodied cis male straight perspective. And when we bring all of those pieces in, that diversity is not just about the color of our skin. And that we need to ensure that we're including everyone.
Everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah. Everyone. I wish I could had it ready already, and you could give me the screen sharing permissions, because I have this identity iceberg that I created. There's a lot of them out there that exist. But what I want everybody to imagine is the classic picture of an iceberg, the side view, where you can see a little bit of it at the top, but I think something like 7/10 of the iceberg is always below the water. Not only that, but I want you to think, I was telling people, imagine you're on the water, okay? Now I need all of you to have like a great imagination. So you're on a boat on the water and you're sitting there and you're looking at the iceberg. But if you look under the waterline and if you look down, you can actually see part of the iceberg below it, right? But you won't be able to see the bottom of it. So there are 3 different levels to this iceberg. There's the above the waterline, there's below the waterline, and there's the part that's so deep below the waterline, you can't even see it. But humans are icebergs. So what do we see that's above the waterline? Race, age, color, or the age we think they are, or the race we think they are, or the ethnicity we think they are. We see visible disabilities, at least what I think is a disability. We make a lot of assumptions about the things we see, but at least they're visible. Just below the waterline are the things that, unless you take the time to look over the boat, whatever the edge of the boat is called, unless you take the time and look over the boat and look underneath the iceberg to appreciate there's stuff under there, you won't see things like some of those other differences: ethnicity, heritage, perspective of style, invisible disabilities, military background, parental status, personality type. We know those things exist, and if we look for them, we'll see them, right? But then there's the stuff all the way down at the bottom of that might not be there unless we ask. Pronouns, gender identity, different types of experiences. Some people won't reveal their religion out of fear of perceptions and retribution.
Yeah.
It's just, there are so many levels to diversity. We have to see them, appreciate them, respect them, value them, want them, embrace them. However, we also have to acknowledge that we can't just make this conversation about everybody's diversity, because that's important. But if we don't acknowledge the barriers to the LGBTQ community, if we don't acknowledge the lack of discussion around disability, if we don't acknowledge the racial tensions in this country that stir things up, or the difference between men and women that we think we've resolved, but women, no, we haven't. We cannot lose sight of those things, because if we do, and if we make diversity all about differences of personality and all about differences of background and experience, you're going to lose trust of those groups. And millennials are the largest percentage of our workforce today and growing. And millennials believe, and I'm generalizing, of course, but millennials believe that this holistic approach to diversity and recognition of those traits and addressing those challenges are important. So if we don't do it, then nobody's going to believe your D&I efforts at all.
Nice. Thank you. And I want to address the question. So we've got Gail in the chat saying, thank you for your great answer earlier. It speaks to those today who are complaining about the leadership being predominantly white male. Those complainers need to look back at who was coming out of school 15 plus years ago and more like 25 to 30 years ago. And then in addition to that, we also have Donnie on the chat in Facebook asking, based on what Jina just said, should we then not expect to see changes in partner metrics until 2037? So that 15 years,
well,
15 years from now.
Every year is changing.
Yeah.
And boomers are dropping out of the workforce at an alarming rate. A lot of this is COVID related, but it's just a trend that we're seeing. And we also know that when I just wrote an article about this, when I'm in sessions with people and I ask people to describe millennials, the terms that come in are selfish, lazy, entitled, young. And then when I ask them, did you know that the oldest millennials are turning 41 this year? People are like, wait, what? 41? That's not young. Wait, what? That totally interrupts this notion that millennials are 20 something. And I say that to Donnie's question because our partners and our senior managers in firms today are millennials. They will be partners in the next few years. The trend has already started. And the pace of change will pick up. So we should see the results. I'm predicting we'll see the results in 25 to 30 years, but we'll start to see in a holistic way. But we're already starting to see the results in our manager level pools. But we don't have the data. The data isn't available to us across the accounting profession, particularly in public accounting, that will give us that. Plus, we don't collect all the data. Like if I wanted to know what percentage of the accounting workforce identifies as LGBTQIA, all the letters, I don't know, there are a lot of them. I have to be able to collect the data, but that's something that requires self-reporting. And if you work in an industry or a firm that is homophobic, are you going to self-report? And if you don't know whether they're homophobic or not, because they don't talk about it at all, are you going to take that chance?
Thank you.
It's so
That's
complicated.
Powerful. Yeah, it's so complicated and so powerful. Thank you.
Yeah. So I'd like to, if you don't mind, Jina, I'd like to go back to those two other questions. So you definitely responded clearly to Gail's, but just to go back to the track analogy, I believe.
Yeah. So, all right, so here's what I want you to do. Everybody, I'm assuming you've watched track and field. So I want you to imagine a starting lineup, right? So we're at the, whatever that's 100-yard dash or whatever, there's that line at the end of the field where they just go straight. I want you to pick a lane. Everybody in your mind, pick a lane 1 through 8. All right, you got it? Now, I set this up as the 50-yard dash. And that's where you picked your lane. But what if I said the race is really, you got to run 1 lap around the track and you may not leave your lane? Would you stick with the lane you picked?
I mean, maybe. What depends on what's down that lane. I mean, I'd like to stick with the lane that I picked.
Well, so here's the thing. If you look at the track from the oval of the track, lane 1 is on the inner lane, lane out is on the outside. If you start from a straight line and everybody runs all the way around the track and has to cross that line, the person in lane 8 has a longer lap than the person in lane 1. So everybody starting on the line, it's fair. And from a starting perspective, it is inequitable in terms of the race you're expecting people to run. And that is why when you see races like the 200, 300, 400 dash and longer, they use something called the staggered start. And we've all seen that, where position 1 is at the furthest back, and then some points forward, there's position 2, and then some point forward, there's position 3. And the finish line is always a straight line, always a straight line. The reason they stagger the start points is so that the person in position 3, from where they start to the finish line, is 400 meters. Where the person in position 1 starts to the finish line, shockingly, is 400 meters. I don't know if they're meters or yards. I don't even know my track language. But if you don't stagger the start, you are assuming that a straight start line is fair. And if it's fair, everybody has an equal shot. If we want real fairness, we have to use a staggered start. That way, everybody has an equal shot at the outcome. Because starting everybody in the same line, which in business translates to giving everybody the same thing, assumes that everybody has the same opportunity. They're all running the same lap. But they are not. What if you have a colleague who's visually impaired, but they haven't told you that because they have tremendously strong coping skills because they don't want to be isolated or marginalized? Or what about somebody who has problems hearing, not profoundly deaf, but somewhere along the spectrum of difficulty? And they don't want to ask you to use closed captioning on Zoom. They are at a disadvantage.
Yeah, that is a brilliant analogy. I love it. Thank you. And I want to add just one little idea. I'm not big into sports. I don't know track very well, but I do remember the Olympics. Gosh, I think it was probably, 8 or so years ago now. It was women's track. And there was a situation where one of the women fell and hurt her ankle pretty badly. And another woman from another country stopped her own race to help this other woman up. And the question that I want to toss out there is, are we shooting for the right objectives? Because what if we could come up with a better outcome than just winning the race? Because when it comes right down to it, neither of those women won the race as far as the time goes, but they got more publicity than the one who did.
Well, I mean, that is a great point.
Yeah.
That comes down to measuring outcomes and results. Yes. And we have to identify measures, right measures. So one of the measures is actually winning the race. I mean, you have to be able to win the race, or why have a race?
Yeah.
So think of that in terms of profitability. Got to win that race. So if somebody falls down, I'm sorry, I feel bad for you, but I got to finish the race. I'll come back for you, but let me finish the race first. So that's a measure. But one of the other measures is that person who's willing to stop and help their competitor across. Why? Because it lifts all of us.
Yes.
So that's a different measure. And they are not competing measures. They are different measures. And so we need to think in terms of outcomes and value the outcomes. Too often, and this is one of the things we do in the accounting industry in particular, we measure success based on if we're still doing it the way we've done it before. Because we live in a compliance mindset, even though compliance is a fraction of the work we do today. It is the muscle we've built. We built a compliance muscle, so we're going to use that muscle. For crying out loud, I don't want any new muscles. Muscles hurt. If anybody's ever done strength training, it hurts the first couple times when you do those squats. Whoo, you can't walk the next day. But we have to recognize that we need to build out different muscles. And then we're not going to count repetitions as a measure of success. We're going to account for differences in muscle strength and tone that we will assess later. So I'm not going to micromanage the little things you do. I don't care how you do it. I don't care where you do it. I don't care what you do. These are the objectives and the outcomes we're trying to achieve. Are you making progress?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And if we switch to that mindset and stop really thinking about, Matthew, you asked earlier, or one of you said it earlier, like we talk so much about how, that we don't talk about why. And even you, Matthew, asked me earlier, I wrote down education versus training, and I don't remember what specifically you shared, but we focus a lot of our D&I efforts on training. Like we can train, all right, I was going to say something horrible, but I'm going to say it, safe space. The first words that came out of my mouth were like, we're going to train the gay away, right? But it doesn't work that way. Training gives people skills to address challenges, overcome challenges, handle situations. Education is necessary to understand the situation you are trying to overcome. Take unconscious bias training for an example. The reason it doesn't work is training for unconscious bias is, here's what biases are. These are biases. Any questions? All right, back to work, people. Like that's unconscious bias training. Education is, we all have biases. This is what it feels like. We're never going to get rid of them. So stop judging yourself. Let's stop judging everybody else. It's fundamentally human, but we also know some of them can be barriers. So if we see them, if we see something, say something. Yes. And create spaces where you can do that.
I love that differentiation between education and training. And one of my favorite ways that I've heard that expressed is actually from Ed Kless and Ron Baker, who are also members of our group here at Accounting Alchemy. I've heard them say, would you rather send your 13-year-old daughter to sex education or sex training?
Oh, no, I don't think I can use it in a training session with clients, but I'm going to remember that. I mean, what's interesting about this is there's this amazing YouTube video. I would encourage people to look it up. It's a whole series of videos. I want to say it took place in England somewhere. And what they did was they asked a lot of people if they would volunteer to take a DNA test. And then they would come back and their results would be revealed to them in person. And so I have to tell you, I can't tell you how many of these videos that I watched, and it brought tears to my eyes, because there are people who, before the DNA test, I'm going to say overtly, like over the top, straight white guy who believes that you have to do things his way. You don't need all of these special things because all of these people coming into the country are immigrants and that's not who we serve. Like this whole horrible stereotypical perspective. Then this person gets his DNA tested and it finds out he's like 37%. I don't remember. They told him like he was, his background was not what he thought. He was maybe second generation immigrant. Some of his ancestry is African diaspora, and he has a very different view now. because his identity changed, because he can see himself and he can see the humanity in other groups that he dismissed. When you make it personal, when you make it emotional, when you can touch someone's heart, when you can spark curiosity, that's how we can have a conversation. Otherwise, so much of it is shamey and blaming and marginalizing. Even having conversations about diversity and inclusion that focus on underrepresented minorities are exclusionary to white men. We are stereotyping white men. We are marginalizing white men. So we can, on the one hand, talk about the need to include underrepresented minorities while simultaneously excluding white men from the conversation. Now, this is a fine line to walk, and there are complexities to all of this. And we have to recognize the barriers of those underrepresented groups, but we have to acknowledge that in our work to do this, we can create new marginalized groups. Does that make sense?
It does.
It definitely does. So can I just a follow-up question on that? Because you said it's a fine line to walk. And, I know through various organizations that I've worked with over the last few years that there's been an increase in training specifically and conversations that fall under the DEI bucket or header, if you will. And generally speaking, they seem to be productive and positive conversations. But what I've also noticed is that in some cases, they've caused more harm than good, right? Created unsafe spaces for people, caused concern and consideration that people weren't even present to before. And now all of a sudden there's this like conflict between people. And so I guess I get, and part of it in on one hand is like, oh, if it's like if you give a teenager the keys to a car, they're not going to know how to drive the car right away and maybe be as safe as they could be, but over time they start to learn. So there's sort of this fine line of like, we need to create the space for people to learn and make mistakes. And also, how do we begin to evaluate like, hey, before I step into this arena, before I get into this conversation, how do I know if this is a safe space? Like, what are the indicators that would suggest, oh, that maybe this has this environment or the way that this is being approached has maybe crossed that line, that fine line in one way or the other?
Well, so the challenge of everything that you talk about is a combination of skills that any one of us has to have individually. So you need to be able to read the room. You need to be able to walk in and know if it's safe for you to be there. And the you I'm talking about is whatever you bring into that room. You have to understand the dynamic of the group that you're in. You have to understand that the people in power positions here, will they protect you? Are they your allies? Not all of that is transparent or even known to you, so you just have to be smart about this. That's part of it. You have to have the skills to manage your own behaviors, responses, reactions. So my boys are now 25 and 26. I think that's how old they are. Don't judge me. I think that's how old they are. And when they were little, I used to watch Sebastian's the older, Dominic's the younger, and I used to watch them argue. And I can't tell you, like, I had this aha moment watching them, that Sebastian, because Dominic is just a difficult child. And so Sebastian had to negotiate with Dominic because we required them to agree before we would let them do certain things. So Sebastian became a bit of a politician, if you will. Well, one of the things that I started to observe is that Sebastian would say something to Dominic. Dominic would react, and then Sebastian will say, well, that's not what I said. And I'm over here like, no, that's kind of what you said. What you really mean by that is, that's not what I meant. Or another thing people will say is, well, that's not what I intended. The challenge is when you say something to someone and it lands on them differently, we, the humans, natural tendency is we say, that's not what I meant, that's not what I said, that was not my intention. when we use those words, we're telling the other person, you heard me wrong. So you're in the wrong. What I have learned is it does not matter what I say. It only matters what you hear. And if what you heard is inconsistent with my intentions, then I have to own that I didn't communicate this in a way that was consistent with my intention. So how can I communicate my intention? I have examples of this when I'm doing training. And the challenge is most of us don't think about intention. We don't know our intention. We don't understand our intention. So when I say that, Matthew, what I mean by that then, to answer your question, is there's no way to fix or anticipate all of what you talked about. All we can do is give individuals encouragement, skills, and understanding how to do that, how to understand that our impact, thank you, Sarah puts it that our impact and our intention, while, are two different things. And they're never going to be aligned, and they're never going to be perfect. And I might say something to offend somebody. Somebody might offend me. How about we all agree that if I say something and it pokes you in the eye, Matthew, you will acknowledge that my goal wasn't to poke you in the eye. And maybe you'll come back and say, well, yeah, I'm not sure I'm reacting to that right. And I'm going to go with the fact that I don't think you intended that. Here's how it's affected me. Now, I can't be defensive when I hear that back. These are communication skills. Diversity and inclusion is not about, we're going to get 3 Black people, 2 Black people. Let's get a person with a disability, preferably one we can see. And if any of them are gay, I mean, bonus, right? This isn't the point of diversity and inclusion. Although that's kind of how we talk about it. And then when they get here, we want them all to be happy, right? Let's just make them all comfortable, but it doesn't make the people already in the room comfortable. So we need people to have the skills to engage, to interact, and we need to hold people accountable when they don't.
Fantastic.
We need to be very clear about the behaviors we want people to show, and then we need to coach them when they don't. Cancel culture, political correctness, this is making this work hard. Because nobody's willing to tell you what they really think if it's going to cost them their job, cost them their promotion. They're no longer going to get invited on the Starbucks run. Nobody wants to do that. So, like I said, this is hard work, but we can't approach it from an intellectual space. We have to understand the dynamics of the people. And we need to bring some of this into the workforce, because the old days of the workforce is come in, put your head down, do your work. Nobody cares about your personal life, and we're not here to like you. Get your work done. If you do good work, you'll get promoted.
Yeah.
And that was when my father was at work. It is somewhat when I was at work. It's definitely not the way my kids work today.
That's beautiful. And I think that that's a fantastic thought as we're starting to wrap up, because we are getting close to our time here. I want to read Sarah's comment in the chat here. She said, intention versus impact. We need to focus on the impact on the other person. It requires an other orientation rather than our default self-orientation. And I find that one of the best ways to do that is by simply taking responsibility for as much as we possibly can, recognizing that responsibility is simply our ability to respond to the situation that we are in. And getting back to what we were talking about previously about the numbers and how this impacts the numbers in the accounting profession and what are our objectives, and is winning the race just a numbers game? Because if we are sacrificing our values on the altar of profit, we're doing this wrong.
You mean we have values?
We freaking better.
Well, I say that tongue in cheek because we didn't always. I wrote something down at the very beginning from something that you said. Accounting is the backbone of business. We know this. It is almost like the skeletal structure of business, and without it, the whole thing falls apart. But accounting is also the sum of our minds. Mm-hmm. Accounting, there's not widgets that we're building. It doesn't require like a manual dexterity, except if you're physically doing audits and you're out climbing things to count stuff. But we need those minds to be sharp. We need those minds to be engaged. We need those minds to be free of fear in order to optimize the power of their minds. And that's how we do really good work.
Yeah.
Can I really quickly, I know you're okay, so we're at the end of time. I want to share this one thing. I want everybody to imagine they're planning a dinner party and they're going to invite a bunch of people over to their dinner party. Many of the people, they know them all, but they all don't know each other. So when you're planning that kind of a dinner party, you're going to think about the food, you're going to think about the music, you're going to think about the style, buffet style. Should we all sit around the table and do family style? Should I fix individual plates? Whatever. You're planning a party because you want people to feel comfortable. So then the next day you have the party over, and then the next day you overhear guest A talking to guest B. And they were saying, so how did you like the party? And guest B was like, it was great, but I didn't feel so comfortable there. But I know she really did a nice job trying to plan that dinner party. It was a really great party. But then if you asked them, would you come back to my next party? And they said no, then I would argue that they didn't feel like they belonged there.
Yeah.
My desire to create a space where everybody had fun is the corporate equivalent of feeling like I want to create an inclusive space. Mm-hmm. But that person's willingness to come, and interest and desire to come back because they really enjoyed that party, is the employee's equivalent of belonging.
Yes.
And thinking about the different ways I need to plate up the food, because I know some of the barriers and challenges of my guests. Maybe somebody's vegetarian, I need to address for that. Somebody's vegan, I need to address for that. Mm-hmm. Somebody's in a wheelchair and I need to make sure my table can accommodate them. That's all equity. Seeing that I have to deal with all of this is diversity. We all understand these things. We just don't talk about them in the context of work. We need to flip the conversation so we take it back to humanity.
Yes, absolutely.
Right,
Oh, it's beautiful. I love it so much. And I think that a really good way to kind of bring this all together is just acknowledging again, something that we talked about in our original intro video, this idea that what we're measuring in accounting, money, isn't real. It's an idea that humans made up. And if people were to disappear from the planet today, money and accounting, finance, all of that would disappear with us. It is a story that we tell. It's a narrative, just like any of our other values and beliefs. So why are we making that story, that narrative of money, more important than belonging? Because honestly, if that's the case, we are measuring the wrong things. I would say that belonging is a better race to win than the bottom line. Do we need both?
Absolutely.
Sure. But you know what? If you're sacrificing the belonging of another human being for the sake of profit, then we are measuring the wrong things. And absolutely. I would love to really shift that culturally within the accounting profession, because if we can teach that to accounting professionals who then are teaching that to their business owner clients, we can make a shift in our culture worldwide. And that is what we are.
There's one last thing to think about, because their clients are already doing this work. Mm-hmm. The clients of accounting firms today are doing the work. So if accounting firms aren't doing the work, we're going to start to lose business. So I think, yes. and all of this stuff is a construct, but it takes people to do it. And people will not bring their work if they feel judged, shamed, marginalized, isolated, or at risk of getting a promotion or even being seen. That's not how humans work.
Absolutely. So we've got just a minute to wrap up. Matthew, do you want to take us home?
Yeah, sure. Wow. I feel like I want to go back and watch this video and like take notes and pause it, because there were just so many amazing tidbits, sprinkled throughout in the whole conversation in general. I think one of my biggest takeaways, and this goes back to something you said, Jina, about accounting being the backbone of business. And, we talk about, I work with a lot of creative people and artists, and I work with them on the topic of money. And there's sort of this anti-capitalism, that I have to contend with. And in this culture, and it's interesting because on the flip side, I see these accountants and I'm like, oh my gosh, if we are really the backbone of this capitalist system, and we have the ability to be an example and to lead change, we're actually like some of the best people to be doing this transformative work on the construct of what is capitalism, what is business, and how does it affect the world. And you mentioned a word, accountability, and we talked about responsibility, and I think accountability is critical. And I just get curious about how can we hold ourselves accountable to be the agents of change for this industry and have this impact on culture and society, that we know we can, and to remove the narrative that, oh, I'm just an accountant, oh, I'm just a bookkeeper, oh, I'm just a tax person. No, well, yes, you are, and because you are, you can, right? And that's I think the thing that just really just like comes front and center for me as I think about today's conversation. So
fantastic.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Matthew. Thank you so much, Jina, for joining us. I know you've got to bounce to another meeting, so we'll just hop off at this point and continue this conversation in the chat on LinkedIn and Facebook. Thank you to our people who joined us live, Gail and Sarah and Donnie, and we look forward to having you back to continue this conversation.
Thank you for having me. I'm honored to be part of this. Thank you.
Have a great day, everyone.
Bye.